So, thanks ever so much for joining, everybody. This is this is a presentation about the role of retrofit coordinator in the PAS 2035 standard, and it has a sprinkling of quality assurance about what the retrofit coordinator actually does in terms of making sure that something is delivered in line with the standard as well, and how quality plays into the delivery of that role. So, just as an agenda, we're going to go through a very brief about us, what a retrofit coordinator is, the responsibilities of the role under the PAS standard, and some of the roles of the retrofit coordinator that aren't necessarily stipulated in the standard but are inferred by the standard itself, the coordinator's role in quality assurance, and then we'll hand back over to Ed for some resources and some up and coming events through the RISE service. So, about us, my name is Ben Nixon. I am a specialist consultant over at Baily, Garner. I have 5 years retrofit experience. I'm a chartered surveyor and a chartered construction manager, qualified retrofit coordinator, and I've had 19 years experience in social housing. And I have my co-host with me who will be fielding questions in the chat, Chris Cakebread, who is our Midlands retrofit lead, who has 10 years in retrofit as a retrofit coordinator, assessor and DEA, who has delivered or is delivering 5,000 properties under the PAS 2035 standard. So, what is a retrofit coordinator? So to understand retrofit coordinator, we first need to understand a little bit of background about PAS 2035 itself and how it came about. So before PAS 2035, way before SHF and SHDF, we had various different schemes that some of you might be aware of, such as Green Deal, etc. A lot of the works that are installed under these previous schemes were completely unregulated and effectively undertaken by door-to-door salesmen or installers that didn't have to have any qualifications to install these measures. So it was determined that a lot of these installations ended up failing. There was a necessity to intervene in this due to some of these failures. There were challenges in accountability for the installation of these measures. No regulation governing them, so it was very difficult to call anyone back if there was a failure. All of this led to a review by the government called the Each Home Counts Review. And out of the embers of that review come the PAS 2035 standard that necessitated a whole house approach with defined roles to retrofitting of properties for energy efficiency purposes. So in that standard, which you all now know and love, I'm sure, PAS 2035, it has a number of roles, one of which is the retrofit coordinator. The coordinator itself is central to the PAS 2035 process. It oversees a concept to in-use life cycle of the project. So it starts at the very front of the project and ends after handover, so after a period of monitoring and evaluation of the success of the project. It is effectively a retrofit specific project management role. So as opposed to a kind of general project manager that you might get in other construction consultant roles, the PAS 2035 retrofit coordinator is effectively a project manager for the standard itself. It is a very specialist skill set in the sense that you have to have a specific qualification under the standard to operate the role, i.e. you can't be a chartered surveyor or you can't be a chartered architect and just walk into the role. You need to have a specific qualification to do so, albeit we always promote existing construction consultant professionals to walk into this role given the read across in the service provided. And that qualification can take anywhere up to a year depending on various different aspects, i.e. who you qualify with, what modules you undertake, whether or not you're classroom-based or distance learning, etc. So some of the key areas of responsibility in this role are overseeing the dwelling assessments, which are undertaken by the retrofit assessor, which is another role within PAS 2035. The retrofit assessor is effectively a surveyor that goes and assesses the functionality of a property and the appropriateness to install retrofit measures there. The retrofit coordinator identifies suitable energy efficiency measures for a property through the use of an improvement option evaluation plan following on from this assessment. The coordinator also ensures PAS 2030 compliant installation. And I have said PAS 2030 as opposed to 2035 here, as 2035 effectively oversees the entirety of the project itself, whereas PAS 2030 is the installation specific standard for energy efficient retrofit. So this is the standard that all installers need to abide by when they're carrying out installation work to properties. The coordinator also monitors the installation process and conducts post-completion evaluations, which can be anything from post-completion surveys to gauge the works and the perception of the works from occupants, all the way to 2 years worth of monitoring if there have been failures along the way. So in terms of responsibility then, so employing the coordinator, there is no specific function that employs a coordinator. It's quite a common myth that there is a specific person that needs to employ the coordinator for any given PAS 2035 project. So the coordinator themselves can be employed by a client, a main contractor, like managing a number of installers, a consultancy, an installer themselves, a retrofit assessment company, a designer company, or even an evaluation company. We would always recommend that the retrofit coordinator is appointed by a company that is independent of the installation process. So that can be a main contractor that is removed from the actual installation process itself. However, we always thoroughly recommend that there is that level of conflict management in place for employing the retrofit coordinator, given that they do sign off the work as compliant in the end of the project. So in terms of some top tips with retrofit coordination, you should always involve the retrofit coordinator at the very earliest opportunity, just because clearly if you are undertaking a large project with lots of moving parts, the retrofit coordinator can be your guide not only through the PAS 2035 process, but use their technical knowledge to apply it to the project and ensure that there is a level of quality that succeeds throughout the project itself. They are technical in their nature, so obviously taking that course that is a retrofit coordination PAS 2035 specific course for level 5 retrofit coordination and risk management course, they are able to answer any technical queries with regards to the standard itself that might crop up. So if they're onboarded early, it means that you have that technical ability for queries early on. They can answer, as I've said, questions on the actual standard itself, and quite often the standard is prescriptive, but every so often it isn't, and there does need to be a judgment call made with some pragmatism around the standard. There is now under PAS 2035-2023 a requirement to get the retrofit coordinator to site to see the installation to every single property. Even if you've got a 1,000, 4,000 property scheme, the retrofit coordinator needs to visit every single one of those properties. Under PAS 2035-2019, which some of you may still be working under if you're working on SHDF 2.1 or 2.2 projects, there was no necessity for the coordinator to visit site. However, given their technical knowledge and their understanding of the scheme from their early involvement, we would always recommend the retrofit coordinator visit site. And then another top tip is to employ a pragmatic coordinator. So many projects I've been on where I haven't been the coordinator, we have had what a lot of people in the industry term as pajama coordinators, who effectively just survive behind their PC at home, don't ever visit site, don't really understand the physical makeup of the project that they're overseeing as a coordinator. Whereas in our opinion, you need to be able to understand that property. You need to be able to visit site, actually see what's going on to that property. And rather than following a predefined process map, have the ability to make a decision and be quite pragmatic around the standard and the application of the standard. Just seen a comment from Stephen there, and I couldn't agree more there, Stephen. Visiting site allows for RC to sort out issues before it gets too far down the line. I would argue that that is also the same for early onboarding of the retrofit coordinator as well, because they will have a level of requisite experience that enables that foresight to see what could turn into an issue. So what a retrofit coordinator is and is not. Although they are not a project manager, there are project management aspects to the role. So they do oversee a number of other roles and bring them together and ensure that there is adequate handover from role to role. Examples being the retrofit assessment to the design stage and the design stage to the installation stage. They act as a technical expert, but should also be aware of time, budget, risk and resource. So although they're not necessarily responsible for those kind of very QSE project managery functions, they should be aware of them, and that is a requisite of the standard. They work to compliances and must adhere in an independent right. So they work for the standard, they don't work specifically for one party. So they have a claim of compliance at the end of the project, which means that they effectively certify the project as retrofit PAS 2035 compliant. So they aren't working for one particular party against another. They are working solely there for the standard. They do not define the strategy for the project. So they can't come in unless they have a specific skill set outside of the standard and their qualification, and effectively determine your strategy as a organisation for retrofit. So if you're a large housing organisation, for example, the retrofit coordinator isn't going to sit there, identify all the properties on your portfolio and identify your strategy. That's not necessarily their role, and they do not manage the contract. And I've put in some brackets there, unless, because the retrofit coordinator, albeit a role that is specifically there for the PAS 2035 standard, they align very well with the role of a contract administrator or employer's agent under the JCT suite of contracts. So actually, if you require a contract administrator as part of your project, if you've got a larger project, the retrofit coordinator quite often will have the skill set to do that as well. And obviously in that you're gleaning an economy of scale as well to make sure that you're not spending too much money on a contract administrator separately. And that's a result of clearly the technical nature of many retrofit coordinators having a background in construction. And further, the Retrofit Academy and many other organisations that let these qualifications require there to be at least 2 years experience in the construction industry when you are sitting the retrofit coordination and risk management level 5 course. So just a bit of a summary of the responsibilities here. So coordinators oversee the PAS 2035 requirements, whereas a project manager develops a retrofit scheme and delivery approach. The coordinator analyses the assessment and development of suitable energy efficiency measures, whereas the project manager would create a project execution plan. So that project execution plan is wide-reaching, whereas determining specific measures for a property clearly isn't as wide-reaching. Overseeing energy modelling and developing the medium-term plan, so what the future of that property is post-retrofit, whereas development and management of a project program would be the project manager's responsibility, not necessarily a coordinator's job to develop programs and kind of stepping into that construction project manager's role. Ensuring other functions receive the required PAS 2035 information. That's what I was talking about in terms of handing off those various gateways of the PAS 2035 process. So kind of goes from coordinator to assessor to designer to installer, back to evaluator and coordinator again. Management of the construction contract is more of a project management role, as is managing overarching risk and managing the actual financials of the project, often through a QS. And then the responsibilities of the coordinators will be undertaking inspections during delivery to monitor installation quality, not necessarily a full clerk of works role, but they'll certainly be having a look at the quality of installation for the PAS 2030 works, and then undertaking the post-completion evaluation as well, as we've discussed. So the coordinator's role in quality assurance, and this is a subject that's quite close to my heart following visiting quite a few properties over the course of the last 2 years to have a look at why retrofit has failed in those properties. So PAS 2035 embeds quality as a non-negotiable principle, ensuring that retrofit projects are effective, safe and sustainable. But quality assurance itself isn't about prevention. It is about prevention in early stages as much as about assessment and inspection. And kind of going back to your point that you've raised in the chat there, Stephen, it's great to have site presence because it means that you can sort out issues before they get to a crescendo. But actually, if they're involved early on in the project and you've got somebody that really values quality highly, you would hope that it never actually gets to that point, albeit you can only make so much allowance for human error. So a high percentage of poorly executed projects, specifically that I've visited, and I don't know about you guys if you ever undertake any visits to completed properties, they have been issues that could have been completely avoided if PAS 2035 principles had been followed. And I say, it says a high percentage there. Looking back on my experience, would probably say all of these. If you followed PAS 2035 to the letter and did everything that you're supposed to under it, the risk basis that PAS exists in means that you would have probably avoided the unintended consequence of a lot of the failures that I've seen. So one of the key reasons for quality in the standard is occupant health and comfort. Obviously, over the course of the last year or two, you would have heard a lot about Awaab's law coming into effect. There is a massive read across between damp and mould and quality in retrofit, as I'm sure many of you would have seen in various articles that have reached the news recently. So these are unintended health consequences, poor air quality, poor moisture management, inconsistency of installation, damp, mouldy homes. All of these can be a result of poorly managed quality, cutting corners, if you like, on a PAS 2035 project. So as a case study, I visited a property last year. It was a routine completion inspection for another retrofit coordinator. No context of any issues when I arrived. All I knew was that there had been an air source heat pump and some solar PV installed as part of the service installation. The air source heat pump replaced a trusty old liquid oil boiler, and the bills had increased from £1,600 a year to £5,000 a year. So in context, that's 500 quid a month they was paying to heat their home, which is extraordinary if you think about it. So just as a bit of interaction, if in the chat, how do you feel a retrofit coordinator could have influenced that? What do you think some of the issues could have been for that level of failure in an installation? So Stephen said that the property clearly wasn't heat pump ready, lack of installation, terribly insulated. Seeing a lot of insulation here. Overview of design. We'll come on to that, John. Monitoring was lacking. Great point, Mark. So there were oversized system in. So yeah, it got some really good ones here. Wrong size pump, insufficient fabric measures and ventilation measures. So all of these are really relevant. Actually, the property was very well insulated. It was a cavity wall property that was quite recent in its construction, so mid-90s. So it had a fairly sizable cavity, which lended itself to cavity wall insulation. No damp spots or any indication that the cavity insulation had failed. Cavity boroscope survey showed that the cavity wall insulation was consistent. There was a ruined roof, but the ruined roof was incredibly well insulated. So we had kind of very well performing double glazed windows. So in terms of that kind of tea cozy of an envelope, we were doing very well in terms of the physicality of that fabric. So I had an inspection of the system and found out that the first point of failure was the system design, as John mentioned there. So they had a look at installing the system and they sized the system correctly. The system was absolutely perfectly sized. So we had our calculator out and we just made sure that they specified the correct kilowatt sizing of the pump itself. What they completely failed to do was do anything at all with the radiators. So they maintained exactly the same radiators for an effective, much smaller system that needed to emit at a lower temperature, so needed a greater surface area on those radiators. And as a result of that, the resident was pumping their air source heat pump full blast for 24 hours a day. So clearly that was a massive issue there. So a follow-on issue to that was, absolutely right, Alex, it is terrible design. It's really bad. But actually, if you'd have followed the PAS standard there and you'd have had adequate oversight of a quality design, that wouldn't have happened. Then you have that handover process. That handover process in PAS 2035 is supposed to demonstrate to the resident how that system works. Well, I'm sorry, but if that system is costing that much, it's not working and it's not been adequately demonstrated, because the resident shouldn't be having it on 24 hours a day. It should be a creeping low level heat that gets turned on as necessary in an air source heat pump. And then somebody mentioned the monitoring in the chat as well. Absolutely. Who's come back as a retrofit coordinator in this project, which was a funded project and did have PAS 2035 compliance, to actually look at who is monitoring this and look at how the system's working? Because there's a clear failure there, and that would have been picked up in monitoring if somebody had actually done the monitoring there. So we've got 3 really key failures there that all could have been completely avoided if a correct process had been used under PAS 2035. Really interesting for me. And I say that quite loosely, is it's interesting, but really affected somebody's life. So somebody's life has got markedly worse because of a lack of quality, effectively, and a lack of oversight that a standard is in place to provide. So just got some of the outcomes here. So coordinator was acting in the interest of the customer, would have ensured the modelling for the air source heat pump determined it was worthwhile improvement, which met the intended outcomes of the project. The coordinator would have had the technical understanding of the system, a basic grasp of operational temperatures and how the air source heat pump works. And I know that somebody's mentioned operational temperatures in the chat there as well. And an understanding of the system would have been shared with the end user. None of this happened. So somebody just turned up, did everything and went because they wanted to get to the next job. And actually PAS 2035 was seen as an inconvenience rather than something that was there for quality and protection for the end user. So just another interactive part of the session then. Just as a group, what do you feel this does for confidence in the sector? And this is a really pertinent time to ask this question, because the last time I did this, we had that report from the BBC where we had some failed cavity wall insulation, and now we've had the NAO report from the Eco project. I'd like you to think about what you think this does for confidence in the sector. Yeah, I mean, Alex is pretty graphic there, drops it into the toilet, but it really does, doesn't it? I mean, if you have, as a resident of, say, a housing association that's part of an SHF project, if you have somebody calling you saying, we want to insulate your home, you're going to run a mile. You're not going to be interested because of effectively what has been a very cavalier approach to applying the standard previously that could have been avoided. And Mark's kind of hit the nail on the head there as well. Where were the RCs? Where was the quality oversight? And don't get me wrong, this opens a can of worms into something that's so much more than just a bit of oversight. It's effectively ECO kind of creating a race to the bottom, if you like, in terms of what funding is available for eco and how big the profit margin you can actually make on any eco funding is, meaning that it's relatively difficult for installers to make a profit on any work that they do. But even still, this should have been seen ages ago. It should have been seen coming. And actually, it files into that bigger picture of trust in the industry, doesn't it? And how much that depletes for trust, like anything. And that would be applicable of local authorities in the wake of Grenfell as well. There's a myriad of other examples and how that bad publicity and one or a couple of bad eggs can really affect the whole of industry. So quality is really, really important in retrofit coordination and PAS 2035 generally. So some examples here, some poor installation that we've seen on our travels as well. You can see here that we've taken a bit of a thermal image, and there is a complete inconsistency in the wall insulation in this property. And you can see here one of the air bricks that was inserted into this property probably could have done with a slightly better insulation there. So this is a cavity wall property that was cavity filled. This is a sheathed air brick, so that goes all the way into the property itself through the cavity. And somebody has decided to fill it with expanding foam, which is prohibited under the installation of any insulation under the standard. So here we've got some very intriguing detailing. So you can see that we've got a meter box that has effectively left a naked piece of wall behind some EWI. That is an escape route for heat from the property, creating quite a large thermal bridge. And then somebody who has decided that it'll probably be best if they don't disturb the gate post that was screwed into the property that they're installing EWI to as well. Yep, good point there, Stephen. Should have fitted some aerogel or even smaller, a thinner profile UI. I agree, it would be failure. Unless, of course, that you could demonstrate that it wasn't a thermal bridge risk through an FRSI or similar, of course. But yeah, there's nothing stopping you just kind of trying to break that thermal bridge by putting a thinner piece of insulation down there or similar. Yeah, I would agree the gate post is a bit of a bang to rights job, that one. So again, this property was an EWI property, no ventilation installed adequately in this one. You can see you've got a bathroom here without any bathroom fan in it. The cause of this was actually some water getting down the side of the insulation itself. So the join at the top of the property had a non-compliant cowl at the top joining the roof line to the EWI and had failed, was only being held together by some mastic. So of course that just created what was effectively a sheath for water to pour into, and then the water had to go somewhere. Invariably, it went inside the property. Yeah, Stephen, you said there that the wall should have never been touched until it was all sorted out. Unfortunately, it was the EWI that caused that one. So no damp before the EWI had actually been installed to this property. Another example of some poor installation here. And one on the left isn't necessarily poor installation, but it's a very common issue that we see when we go and have a look at roofs. So this one is an insulated roof where somebody has stored all of their Christmas decorations up there, which I know that I certainly do. And that compresses the insulation and renders it a lot less useful than it is modelled to be. Then on the right hand side, somebody has installed some insulation, but hasn't crossed the insulation over the joists. So you've effectively got a cold bridge there created by the joists in the loft space. And then this one of my personal favourites, somebody was due to install some background ventilation through means of trickle vents in windows, and decided to just slap a trickle vent on there and put a couple of drill holes in there. So it doesn't quite meet approved document Part F requirements for background ventilation, that one, I'd imagine. So clearly called the installer back to that one. Wasn't a very good installation. So in terms of energy efficiency, savings and durability there. So I think, in my opinion, quality closes that gap between expectation and reality. So if you have no quality management mechanism through a retrofit coordinator or on other projects like a clerk of works, etc., making sure that everything's being installed the way it should be, making sure that you don't get some of these home builders that cut corners and leave people purchasing houses with lots of issues to solve, that expectation becomes a reality if you don't have that in place, and that slowly diminishing set of circumstances arises where it gets worse and worse, just where you've got no oversight. Nobody's got a hoop around the neck of whoever's doing the install to make sure that they are following what they have to. You will invariably start to have that reality fade away from what the expectations are. So another output of that is lower energy bills, or at very least lower energy consumption as part of lower energy bills, because obviously if you're going from a gas source to an electric source, bills can increase slightly or remain stagnant because of the cost of electricity versus gas, but it is all about that energy consumption and lowering it. Puts us closer to achieving those decarbonisation goals. So if a property requires less heat to warm it up, you're burning less, so you're getting closer to decarbonisation. Quality means that long-lasting product. I mean, you can all imagine a brick wall that was put together in Victorian era and that's still standing today. It's because of the quality with which it was put together, because you'd imagine that if it didn't have the quality, it wouldn't still be standing. And then it also lowers that likelihood of unintended consequences that we've discussed there as well. So the air source heat pump example being pertinent there. There was a massive unintended consequence through three kind of consequent failures of applying that PAS 2035 standard to the installation of the measure. So in terms of funding and alignment, so any 2035 project that is government funded needs to be compliant. So any retrofit project that's government funded needs to be PAS 2035 compliant. So anything GBIS, anything eco, anything warmer homes, anything SHF or SHDF, needs to be PAS 2035 compliant for residential retrofit, that is. The standard provides that benchmark of quality assurance for the funding. So the reason government want it to be PAS 2035 compliant is because the document is recognised as being adequate to install to provide that quality at the end of the process. And the beauty of it is that the quality behind the standard is consistent regardless of the project. It can apply to a simple loft top up, it can apply to a whole house retrofit. The standard itself will ensure that the quality is there if followed properly. And look, compliance is challenging. We all hear these beleaguered colleagues that talk about how difficult it is to jump through the hoops of PAS 2035. But effectively, it is a QMS. It is a quality management system. And all contractors have a quality management system. This just unifies that system and makes it the same for absolutely everybody. And that's the way I put this when I'm talking to clients about PAS 2035 and if it's worth having it in place. It's always worth having it in place because it is a QMS. In its rawest form, it manages quality. So in terms of competency, skills and project complexity, a retrofit coordinator can bring that technical knowledge and apply it to retrofit specifically. It is a project management role, so there's a clear understanding of process. A background in construction is a requirement for a retrofit coordinator, so you'll have that assurance that they do understand construction, they do understand detailing, they do understand buildings. They streamline processes through that experience. So we talk about the kind of added hoops to jump through for the PAS process. Actually, if you've got a retrofit coordinator who's good at what he does on board or she does on board, those hoops become a lot bigger and easier to jump through. They provide competence to a project, so clearly that qualification is a part of that, but that experience is a part of that as well. Being able to identify early some of those issues that arise on projects and having the wherewithal to understand what to do to prohibit them or avoid them. It abolishes that box ticking attitude. So again, going back to those pajama coordinators who kind of have a computer says no attitude to applying the standard to anything, and actually taking that pragmatic approach and understanding where the standard really needs to be applied and how the installation itself applies to the standard. And although, yes, the PAS 2035 process does cost, it does cost a little bit more than just going ahead and doing an install. This has the potential to avoid massive costs further down the line. And again, one of the articles that I wrote about a year ago was about a lady that had an EWI install as part of a government funded scheme. And she now has dry rot in her property, which is a scourge of a property. It can really attack a property and cost a lot to correct. At last quote, it was £250,000 to correct that issue. Now, if she had an adequate retrofit coordinator on that project, that wouldn't have happened. The oversight provided for that quality of service would not have cost £250,000. It would have cost a damn sight less, and you wouldn't have seen that issue arise. So in terms of outcome, PAS 2035 needs to be treated as a roadmap with the coordinator as the navigator. So they are there for the duration of the standards, various different gateways, and can apply the gateways to the various stages of the project. Quality isn't an option. You've seen what happens when quality isn't applied to a project through the standard. It enables responsible scaling up as well. So if you have quality installation, not only do you enable the scaling up and education of installers and the rest of the project team, you also enable the trust in the standard to do so. And quality unlocks those long-term benefits, not just the benefits of a long-standing installation, but the success of the installation as well, and what that means for either micro or macro obligations of organisations, be it making sure that their residents individually have nice, easy to heat, comfortable, warm homes, or decarbonisation as a whole for the entire country and the entire globe.